quick reminder. So today is the 15th. We have Gilbert Ryle's Descartes Myth, and I had some awesome slides. They're some of the best slides. I know, you can miss out on them. There's even nudity. It really is. Descartes drew some pictures of naked people, not in a pornographic sense, but in a pedagogical sense, so that he could show how things work. Yes? I did call roll. Anyone else? Well, since this is still coming up, I'll do that real quick. Let's see. Oh, this isn't working either. What is going on? All right, just a second. Alex is here. Who else came in? Just a minute ago. Just go with last names, and I'll just fix it. Oh, not all at once, though. Ortiz, I already got you. Danish is here. Who else? That's it? All right. Curious. Okay, you remember last time some of the arguments we gave for substance dualism? Did something happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we can have class after all. This is how dependent we are on technology. Still, I'm not convinced it's going to come on yet. So we did 4, but there's more than 4. What are some arguments that the mind is distinct, that is different than body?
Substance dualism.
Right, and what are the arguments for that? Still not working.
Indubitable'ti argument.
All right. There's nudity. So I didn't do anything different. I did the exact same thing initially. All right, so let's get going. By the way, let's also be cautious with the language today. I know you guys you're prone toward bad language. Hey, how are you? My mom's in the audience. I don't want her knowing that I allow. Yes, she's right there. Was this the class that she called? So that's where she is. Yeah. Normally, I'd have you turn your cell phones off, unless your mother is calling. Then you could answer the phone, which I did. And it was an emergency, but you recall we had stuff to do in class, so I just called her back. I think everything was fine. They eventually put the fire out. So there's the fire there. All right, so yeah, which is weird. Don't even have a dog. So somebody's dog died in that tragedy. All right, so you were saying the indubitability argument, which is a great word. What is the indubitability argument in a nutshell? That the mind is distinct from the body. Go ahead.
I can doubt the existence of my body, but you cannot doubt the existence of your mind, so therefore they have to be separate.
Right, and so there's a premise there that we'd add, Leibniz law, which says if X and Y are identical, then they have to have all of the same features. The mind has a feature that is Descartes would call indubitability, and the body has a feature, dubitability. Those are totally different things. If X and Y have different features, it must be the case that they're not identical. And if they're not identical, then we can say they're distinct. And that gives room for arguments for immortality and other things.
Descartes also theorized during his indubitability argument that we can be nothing more than vast in water because we can't truly our brain is the thing that we can perceive as being real. So he said our minds could all be sitting like that and everything would be sitting around us.
Oh, we can, right. So that was in more detail to support premise 1, which is that I can doubt my body. It's logically possible to imagine my beliefs that I have a body are false, because he's looking for certainty, and if I'm relying on my senses, which tells me I have a body, but our senses are prone to error, we can throw out everything that comes in from our senses, and in doing so, we throw out the possibility that we have a body. We could be mistaken, in other words, that we have a body. We can doubt the existence of our bodies. You can't do that with our minds, because to doubt you have a mind is already to be engaging in thought. And all thinking things necessarily exist. Descartes' a doubter, therefore a thinker, therefore exists. So we rehearsed that argument. There was the divisibility argument, which follows the same structure. My body has the property of being divisible. My mind does not have the property of being divisible. Leibniz law, therefore mind and body are distinct. Right? Then there was Leibniz-Mill, where we imagine expanding the human body such that we can walk through it, and we see physical processes, but we don't see any mental processes. and we gave examples of neurosurgeons cutting into people's brains while they're awake, and having them think about certain things. Think about a pink elephant, or do this mathematical equation, or whatever. We see the neurons, we see the blood and all the physical stuff, but we don't see any of the mental states. So mental states and physical states are distinct. And then we ended with the knowledge argument, the thought experiment about Mary, the neuroscientist. Who wants to take a stab at that one? Just tell us the story. Because it's a story. It's a little thought experiment. What's Mary, the knowledge? Yeah, go ahead.
It's the one who, when they were cutting into her brain, they were hitting her laughter center.
Oh, that's a different one. That was a specific case related to problems with identity theory. So that's a different one, yeah?
She knew everything there is to know about color, but she was locked in a room without color, right? Something like that.
That's right.
And then she knows everything, I guess data-wise about color, but she's never experienced it until she leaves the room.
That's right.
She gains new knowledge, even though she already had all the knowledge that there was.
Well, she had all the physical facts.
All the physical.
That's the key phrase. So Mary, an omniscient neuroscientist about color perception, she has every single physical fact, let's imagine, there is to know about perceiving color, but she's learned all of this in a black and white room that she's never left. And then our intuitions are that when she leaves that room for the first time and sees a red tomato or whatever the example was, she's going to learn something new. What is she learning? What it's like to experience the color red. And if she had all the physical facts before that, and yet doesn't know what it's like to experience red, when she leaves the room and sees red for the first time, she must gain, we think, gain new information, new facts, above and beyond the physical facts, because she already had all the physical facts. That means experience, the what it's like to have experience of the world, in this case color perception, can't be merely reduced to physical facts. Because if they could, then she would have already known what it's like to experience, to know what red is, without actually having gone out into of leaving that black and white room. And our intuitions tell us that that seems impossible. Did you want to add to that?
What is qualitative versus quantitative?
It's qualitative versus physical facts is the way that Frank Jackson puts it. So qualitative would be like, so philosophers of mind use that word qualia. Just they coined that term. Really no reason. This is unnecessary to add verbiage there because we already have words for it. A qualitative or phenomenal experience, the what it's like. That's different than having purely physical facts. So she understands how the color red, what we call red, is the particular number or frequency. But do you think when you see the numbers or frequencies of what red is, that's the same thing as the rich experience of perceiving red? Because if it were, then we could just do paintings. Think of a Van Gogh painting that's doesn't have any colors. It just has numbers and frequencies. You know what I mean? You just see the frequencies. Look at that. Whatever red is, frequency 72.5 on the wavelength. That's an awesome color there. It doesn't have you're missing something. That physical fact seems to be insufficient.
Could you say that the physical facts are like an encyclopedia and then the qualitative is like the human mind, like in your interaction with the information?
You're saying yes. I don't know how to answer that. Could you answer it?
Or just like something like an experience, like you're interacting with what you're, I guess, given, like the facts that you're given, so you're actually like experiencing the neurons, like, and the receptors and the rods, like, actually do what they're meant to do, so like seeing red, and then that's what your brain is doing, so as you're seeing it, you actually are interacting with what it says that your brain does.
And what Descartes and others would say, and Frank Jackson in the knowledge argument is trying to say is, the factual encyclopedic information, the purely data, or what did you say, quantitative, the numbers, we may be able to reduce things and quantify things with respect to experience by saying my experience of color is just neurons firing in this way, in this purely factual way, encyclopedic way. But that leaves something out. In the same way that we discussed, maybe I didn't give this analogy, trying to explain traffic patterns by looking at the chemical properties of the individual cars. What are you doing? You're not going to learn anything about why cars go in the patterns that they do. Why is there traffic backups here or there? Looking at the chemical features of cars is the wrong level of explanation. And we might say that's it's the wrong level of explanation with respect to consciousness to say that it's just these neurons firing. It seems something's always going to be left out, and namely the experience or the what it is like from your first person perspective to see the world and experience the world. And so each of them, those are just 4 arguments, 2 of which are straight out of Descartes, the indubitability and divisibility, and the other 2 were later, or Leibniz-Mill was a contemporary, as we discussed, and Frank Jackson's argument was from the 1980s. And I mentioned he's famous for that thought experiment, but he's recently rejected it. He says, I don't agree with my previous self, and I'll say why that is later on. But there are other arguments we might give for why the mind is distinct from the body, and Ryle covers a couple of them. There's one about out-of-body experiences. Have you heard about those? Has anyone had an out-of-body experience? What is that? I've never had one, so I've...
Yeah, so I used to have sleep paralysis a lot, which is your brain puts the block on the motor cortex, so when you're dreaming, you can't act out your dreams during REM sleep.
Which is what you want, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because you could get into some bad situations.
Right.
So sometimes when you wake up out of REM sleep, the block on your motor cortex doesn't come off. So you are awake, but your body isn't technically awake. So sometimes I would, like, this sounds crazy, but I would sit up, but it wouldn't be my body. And then I would, like, see my room, and it's not like one of those hypnagogic hallucinations where you're, like, being dragged around your room, and then it was like, and then I saw, like, my body on the bed, and I was like, this is weird.
Yeah.
And it's happened twice, but it hasn't happened in a while.
Okay, so that, and this is not, it doesn't happen often, but in cases of surgery, it happens enough that it makes it into a philosophy textbook with respect to supporting the case that perhaps the mind and body are distinct. Here it seems there's a separation. And then the interesting question is, what does the because it's non-physical, it feels that way, what is the mode of sensation? Because you don't have eyes. If eyes are physical, what is the mode of seeing that enables you to observe your body from, and is it above? That seems to be a common motif, so to speak, of the experience.
Usually, yeah, and then some people, like, take it seriously and they
don't
it's
you?
Astral
You don't?
projection.
Oh,
I mean, like, I take it. I mean, that happened, but some people go around and do stuff while they're out of their body. Like, they can go places.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, they
can leave their body behind and go other places?
Yeah, because there's, like, because when this happened, I read about it, which just scared me more.
Yeah, not on the internet, I hope. Okay, all right.
Well, you're attached to your body by, like a cord.
Okay, that's going to take us to Descartes in a second, but go on, yeah.
And so it can't be cut or anything.
Okay.
And some people say they're
According to astral projection and what you're talking about here.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I got you.
I don't really know.
Well, if we accumulate the data on this, and it's hard to demonstrate this, it's hard to prove this, although there are groups who come up with, and I have to tell you, scientists since the 1990s, remember consciousness studies, and in particular paranormal or anomalous cases of consciousness have been ignored ultimately within science throughout the 20th century until about the 1990s, where you have this science of Tour to Science of Consciousness study that comes out every year now, and they're actually finding ways of trying to understand more about, first of all, consciousness as being fundamental and of scientific importance, but also taking seriously, from a scientific perspective, these experiences of people who have out-of-body experiences. And so one way they've done this, and I've not followed up any time recently about this, to establish whether the data has accumulated sufficiently to say, here's a case in which we don't know how to explain it, other than that the person has left their body. So since it's so common in cases of surgery, because there's anesthesia that puts this out, we talked about anesthesia last time, which is turning off consciousness, whatever consciousness is, which is scary in itself. And so they have, here's the operating table. I'm not going to draw first, well, I will. There's you. And then the surgeons are all around here, and there's lights and everything. And oftentimes people will claim to hear the surgeons talking. And the surgeons will say, yeah, we did say those things. We did make those jokes. They do make a lot of jokes. It's an odd line of work, especially if it's in emergency room type places. Doctors make dark humor all the time, mainly so they can continue doing their job. It's so difficult. In any case, it sucks if you're under and you can hear them making these dark jokes, and you're aware a little bit of, oh, this is at my expense. But anyway, they can hear this, and doctors say, yeah, we did say that. One explanation for that is, oh, we didn't give them enough anesthesia. They're actually conscious enough to still hear what's going on. And that's a purely natural explanation. But for those who claim to, in a sense, float, and they can see their bodies, I don't know why I'm even trying to draw that.
Well, you flunked kindergarten, remember?
Well, I don't want mom seeing my penmanship at 44. I'm like, how old am I? Whatever. They think I'm 30. Damn it, it came out. And so yeah, 25 age. So how could I demonstrate, yeah, this is evidence that you left your body. And one of the ways, the ingenious ways of doing this, is to put shelving on the top of the walls, real high up, so and put objects up there, really strange objects, that if you were up there and you'd see them, they would stick out to you and say, that's weird. But you could only see them if you were way up there on a ladder or whatever. And since it's so common that we perceive ourselves as floating and seeing ourselves from above, here's the question. If somebody says, I was awake, I felt I had an out-of-body experience. So you simply ask, what did you see? Well, I saw the doctors doing this and that, and they were saying these things. And then there was a stuffed purple narwhal up on the top, on the shelf. That was very unexpected. That, if that were to be shown, I think, would it prove conclusively that that's an out-of-body experience? It would demonstrate that we need something else to explain that than that they were not fully unconscious, right? And to my knowledge, that hasn't been demonstrated yet. Nobody's actually shown that. But that's one way of at least taking seriously those claims. Do you have a question? I think that's a pretty damn good drawing. It's not as good as Descartes and his effort at 16th century porn. Let's get into it, into Descartes. This is from his treatise on man, I think. And in it, well, first of all, let's assume we've accepted one or all of the arguments that show the mind is distinct from body. And again, we started with the common sense notion that that's the case. I have a mind, and it's not physical, it's not extended in space. I have thoughts, and they don't have weight, even though we metaphorically say that's a heavy, deep thought. We don't mean that literally. But we have bodies that are extended in space. And that common sense model is with us today because of Descartes. The question now is, how do you get those things together? If we've argued they're distinct with all those arguments we've looked at, and let's for the sake of argument assume we're convinced by one or all of them, now the fundamental problem arises, and that's the problem of interactionism. Remember, substance or Cartesian dualism is a two-way interactionism. My mind, non-physical, has thoughts, causes things to happen in my brain, which causes things to happen in the physical world. My body, which is physical, could undergo damage, and that causes non-physical things like pain and so forth. Now, how does that get explained? We left off with this last time. This rather foolish person has his foot in the fire, and Descartes is showing that it sends signals. He called them animal spirits, but they're what we might call impulses that sends them up our efferent nervous system all the way up. And he had a great understanding of how the human body worked. Did I tell you why he knew so much about the human body?
He would, what's it called? Do surgeries on live
animals. Not humans, but he would find corpses and dissect them. We don't find them. Sorry. You just go around looking for dead bodies. Well, he did, I'm told, bribe somebody at a mortuary, or paid them to bring him bodies for studying purposes. This was something you're not supposed to do at the time. The Catholic Church frowned on it. Of course, they frown.
They still do.
They probably still do frown on paying for corpses so that you can cut into them. Most people might have some problems with that. But he also engaged in vivisection. That is, dissecting animals while they're alive. And that we might find somewhat abhorrent today. But for him, that's no more abhorrent than cutting into a computer. Or let's use a robot. Something you know is made out of plastic and silicon and metal. That's programmed. Descartes didn't use the word program, but he basically called animals, non-human animals, automata, soulless automata, or what we call machines. And he uses an example of in France there was soulless automata. They lack souls. Animals don't have souls. If they did have souls, they'd be capable of speaking and telling us, hey, stop killing us, stop torturing us. But they don't. They can't speak. And this is, believe it or not, that's one of Descartes' arguments. I think if he were alive today, he would change his mind and say, I can't believe I cut into these animals. I'm so sorry. There's a lot of evidence that they're intelligent. They even have pineal glands themselves. Many animals do. Right? And that's where the animal spirits connect in the physical world. And that pineal gland is the source of interaction. Here's the pineal gland. It's the source of interaction, Descartes claims. And there is a pineal gland. It's a very small area of our brain. It's in the center of the brain, and it doesn't come in halves like so many other parts of the brain, which Descartes argued, well, that's good enough reason to say this is where it all occurs. This is where the spiritual interacts with the physical, and he calls it the seat of the soul. He thinks this is if you want to ask you want to ask where does mind and body interact, here's Descartes' answer. In the brain, but specifically a place called the pineal gland. And again, he has some, we'll get to this in a moment with Gilbert Ryle's response to this. But there's some issues with invoking a specific part, for instance, where mind and body interact. Contemporary science, neuroanatomists and so forth, would look at this gland, and I believe the view is that it produces melatonin, which is important. And it regulates sleep cycles. Some argue, psychiatry, I've forgotten his name, a psychiatrist, who's written a paper that it also creates naturally DMT, which is, does anyone know what DMT is? Well, I guess I'd tell you there.
Oh, isn't that like...
I've already forgotten it, methyltryptophan. Tryptophan? That can't be right. Is it tryptophan? The stuff that's in turkey?
That's tryptophan.
Yeah. Anyway, this gives you, if you have enough turkey, you can get mystical experiences. But this produces it. That's interesting. But psychiatrists today, scientists today, don't see this necessarily as where the soul and body interact. Even though, as I mentioned, psychologists, that literally means the study of soul. Psychology is the study of soul. There's the area. This is a cross-section of the brain, and there's where the pineal gland is. It's not normally purple. It's actually reddish, I think, but that's just so you can see it. And notice it's kind of right in the middle, and it doesn't come in halves, which is a kind of arbitrary decision. Here's why it's happening here, because there's two parts of all our other brain sections. Hippocampus has two parts, two hemispheres, and so on. So Descartes says, well, perhaps this is where it happens. And so that's interesting, but it doesn't solve any problems. It just pushes it back. Our question is, how do mind and body interact? How does something, by definition, not physical, or as Descartes would put it, incorporeal, interact with something physical? Our common sense says it happens all the time. Telling us where it happens hasn't explained why or how it happens. Now we want to know, how does the non-physical interact with that physical thing, which is like, I think it's the size of a grain of rice. And of course, there's animals that have pineal glands as well. And he knows they cry out. He knows they cry out. And he'll put it as if in pain. Are they conscious too? He says, no. They're not. And I've already sort of anticipated this, but even the dumbest of brutes, I think he puts it, the lowest type of man, is capable of speaking and saying, you're hurting me. Animals don't have that capacity. Animals lack consciousness. They lack souls. Therefore, they lack the capacity to feel. They're just bodies like... I know that's weird, and I know it's hard for you to accept that cutting into animals could ever be acceptable while they're alive. But think of it in terms, as I was about to say earlier, of cutting into a robot or a computer that's been programmed to cry out. Like you hit it, and it's... Moved. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that moved. You hit it, and it cries, ow! Screams. What are you going to do? You're going to be worried about it? Would you be concerned? You would not. Or maybe, no, you wouldn't. Do you remember that Futurama episode, cartoon, where there's a robot, it's on fire, comes smashing out of a burning building, and it's screaming, "Why? Why was I programmed to feel pain?" If you're programmed, with that, does that mean he's not feeling pain? Or that the programming is what causes the pain? And this is anticipation for next class when we look at artificial intelligence. The way that I suspect, our intuitions tell us about machines that can move around, that have artificial intelligence, that act as if they can feel and see and learn and are intelligent. I suspect your view of them is they can't actually feel. They're programmed to act as if they could. That's how Descartes saw animals. And I think Descartes would change his mind today, given all the animal studies, and understanding of how intelligent many of these animals are, and so on. Automata. He uses that term. There's Hank. See? Hank could take notes, take calls. They act as if. So he uses an example of these robots, I guess. He didn't call them robots. That's not a term that comes out until the 20th century. But they're mechanical and they're pneumatic. They send air through them to make it look like they're moving. That's what Descartes thinks of animals. They just have these. They're just machines. And humans are just machines too. If all we were bodies, we'd just be meat machines, meat bags, and so on. But we also have souls. We have minds. And again, this is a potential problem, but it's not really the biggest problem philosophically or metaphysically with Cartesian substance dualism. And I'll post these slides up in a bit. So I think if Descartes were alive, he'd say Hank probably is capable of feeling, and I wouldn't cut into him. Look at him, he's grading your papers, as I showed you before. He's a good cat. You've seen Hank before, right? Yeah, he makes it in here a lot. Well, there's a contemporary of Descartes, her name was Elizabeth, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, and she was one of the many people who read his work. So his work on meditations, on first philosophy, was probably one of the first peer-reviewed papers, texts in an official capacity. So he's presenting this to other people, saying, I'm going to take your advice on this, give me some, read over it and tell me what you think, in a way that was more formal, in the way that's similar to peer review today. And Elizabeth of Bohemia had some interesting questions that remain today, that are still problems. She didn't get a whole lot of credit. She doesn't make it into a lot of philosophy courses because, what? She's a woman. That's right. That's not a trivial claim. We'll talk more about that toward the end of the semester when we look at ethics. Philosophy, the history of philosophy has a significant problem with that. Things are changing, but very, very slowly. In any case, her critiques are still some of the strongest critiques against what might be called substance dualism. And the question she asks is one that seems obvious to us perhaps now, but it was taken for granted that there just are incorporeal substances. Remember, corpus, body, incorporeal means lacking a body. What are these things? And in particular, how is it that they interact with something physical? And for some reason, reading Elizabeth of Bohemia's, this was suggested reading in there, reminded me of Mark Twain's quote. How come the mind gets drunk when the body does the drinking? Do you understand the point of the question? Do you have an answer to it? If I'm a substance, I don't know that he raised this because he's trying to pose problems with substance dualism, but you can imagine how it might do so. It might raise problems. If I'm a substance dualist, why is this a problem? How does this raise an issue? Anyone here get drunk? Sorry. Rephrase the question differently. Nobody gets you. My mom drinks too. It's all right. You don't have to be quiet. What? I said my mom. So, what if you were all right? You're not going to do this, but if you had to drink and drive, don't do it. But if you had to and you got pulled over, and you were a substance, could you get out of a ticket by saying, "Officer, it's all right. I'm a substance dualist. It's actually my body that is drunk. My mind, which is me, I am my mind, is perfectly fine." He'd probably think you were high as well. Fair point. Yeah. hadn't thought. So you wouldn't use this. By the way, first of all, don't drink and drive. But if you really have to, perhaps be a substance dualist. Would it get you out of the problem? No, it wouldn't. But notice, but really, what is the issue here? What happens when you get inebriated? Is it magical? Kind of feels magical. But it's not. There's a natural explanation for it. Isn't there? Sometimes they speak of your you're so much alcohol, your neurons are swimming in it. Right? Which is not good. There's a physical process, a chemical process that gets into your brain and makes you feel a certain way. But how does that get into your mind and make you feel a certain way? Where does the alcohol get into your non-physical mind? Do you see the question? How does the mind get drunk when it's the body that's drinking? Yes?
Is it the blood flowing through your body? I mean, it is
Yes.
blood alcohol. So
It's right. What's your blood alcohol level?
Yeah.
All over. Is there blood? Does your mind have blood in it? Wouldn't that be weird if you had blood in your mind? This is an odd question. My mind is bleeding. Is that metaphorical? No, literally. It's bleeding. Well, that blood is physical. Minds are not. How can something not physical bleed? Oh, I don't know. This is a legitimate. You have an answer? How's that?
Because your mind is different from your brain. Your brain is technically part of your body.
Oh, it's actually part of your body, certainly.
Your mind is
Incorporeal. Right, but that's the problem. How does alcohol get to it, to affect it? If it's not physical,
That goes through your physical body.
so it's only your physical body that's drunk. Can't you use the substance dualist argument? Again, officer, it's my body. And you and I know we are really minds and souls. This would be a perfect time for a philosophical argument with a police officer on the side of a road. Wouldn't that make the point?
But it's similar to the argument that, I forget who it was, I think it was the Leibniz guy, who I was talking about if you lay your hand in a fire, your physical body is being hurt, but you're still going to register the pain in your brain, in your mind.
Couldn't we say that pain, how does a mind register the pain? Painkillers, did I mention how strange I thought painkillers were? I think I may have even told you this years ago. You stub your toe, how does the pain pill know where to go? You just take some Tylenol. Well, how does it know to get to my toe? I don't know if that's ever happened. Maybe I'm rethinking that happened. But it doesn't go to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But when you take like Advil or something, it's supposed to help anything that's in pain. It doesn't just go to one thing.
Right, right. Because it's dampening a signal in many cases, or it could also act as a yes, but when it's to reduce swelling. What's that called? Yeah. Good. So it could act as an anti-inflammatory, which it doesn't go directly. It's not like smart drugs that go only to your toe that's damaged. That's what I thought yesterday. So somebody told me, that's not it. But it goes to dampening a signal to the brain. But does it dampen the signal then to the mind? I don't know if the question's getting there yet. If it gets quite to what we're at. Elizabeth is asking this question. Princess Elizabeth is asking this question that Descartes has presupposed in his argument. So she says, and this is the first page of that reading that's posted online, given that the soul of a human being is only a thinking substance, that is, it's not physical, its job is to think, to have mental states that aren't physical in space. They're in time. Our thoughts are in time, but they're not in space. You could put it that way. How can it, the mind, affect the bodily spirits in order to bring about voluntary actions? That fundamental question is still with us, I think, today. And if we don't have an answer for that, then we may be in trouble insofar as we want to maintain this substance dualism. We know what the I does. It thinks. The question is, what in the world is it? And I don't mean that in the identity sense that we were talking about last week. It is kind of related to that. But what is it, and in particular, how does it connect? Again, you don't need to write all these quotes down. I'll have these slides for you. Perhaps I'll put them up later today or tomorrow. This doesn't seem related, but it is. Nina Kulagana, I think her name was, from the 1960s. Do you see what she's doing there? I think that's I don't know what that is, an egg or a ping pong ball. Do you see what's happening there? According to this picture?
She like levitating.
She's levitating that ball. How is she doing that? Isn't that fascinating? I think there's another picture. You can't really tell what's going on here, but she's causing objects to move with her mind alone. Telekinesis, precisely. Fascinating. Nina Kulagina. Uri Geller was supposed to be able to do this as well. Fascinating stuff. He's able to bend spoons with his mind alone. You have a question?
No, this was debunked. The bending spoons thing.
Correct. Well, not according to him, because he still holds that he's able to do it. The amazing James Randi, who was a trained magician. Do I have a picture? No, I don't think he's there. James Randi, in the 70s and 80s, when Uri Geller was very famous and he would go on to Johnny Carson show. Johnny Carson was a trained magician, so he was interested in this. He saw this as magic tricks. Uri Geller thought it as telekinesis, psychokinesis, soul moving things, mind moving things. Not if you were to do a poll of the American populace about whether or not you have a mind and a body, the vast majority of us would say yes. And is the mind physical? No, it's non-physical. But does the mind interact and cause things to happen in the physical world? Yes. The vast majority of us would say yes. How many of us think that telekinesis is possible? How many of us think that I can move this mug with my mind alone? Most people think not. Most people don't think that's possible. And as you noted, Uri Geller, how is he doing this? Well, James Randi simply watched him, and as a trained magician was good at tricks and knowing these things, and it prestidigitation. I thought you'd be impressed with that word. I learned that from Curious George. Prestidigitation. It's like, wow, that's an awesome word. That's his trick of the hand. And he watched Uri Geller, because what he would do, he'd come out on stage with a spoon, and he would just gently gently rub it. And then magically it would bend. And then Barbara Walters at one point asked, how are you doing that? Are you just thinking bend? He says, yes. I'm thinking bend with my mind alone. Well, then what's going on with your finger? Oh, you didn't really have an explanation for that. What he was doing, because he had brought his own spoons, which is ridiculous, that's the kind of test that they allowed. He brought his own spoons, which all he had to do was bend the spoon ahead of time, a bunch of times. And then he brings the spoon out. It's already basically damaged, and it's about to bend and break on its own. So when he gets on stage, he just has to gently touch it, and it magically bends. Nothing really surprising. And there's a lot of other ways of testing things that James Randi did. James Randi would show this is how it's done. Benny Hinn, who was famous for healing people in these huge auditoriums, how is he doing this? How does he know the people in the audience? Well, his wife, he had an earpiece. James Randi figured this out. I'll bet there's somebody telling him about information of the people in the audience. And indeed, his wife was reporting to him, all right, now there's a Jane Addams in the left side of the theater. She's suffering from gallbladder something or other. She'd be more specific than that. I don't know what gallbladder it is. Her gallbladder exploded. And so, what's a gallbladder? Doesn't matter. And so he would say, I'm getting, is there a Jenny with gallbladder explosive problems? And yes, I do. And it seemed magical. He brought a shortwave radio and broke the signal, was able to hear her, and published this and said, look, this person's a scam. He's scamming you. It turns out that he was, and Benny Hinn went off the air for a number of years, and then came back and did the same damn thing, and got a lot of money to do it. It's amazing how it works. I don't know where the state of Uri Geller is now, but my point is, there's not scientific evidence of psychokinesis. Why is this relevant to substance dualism? Remember again, the vast majority of, at least the American populace, the last I checked on this, are, in one stripe or another, substance dualists. And we know what that means. But the vast majority of that populace does not accept the possibility of psychokinesis. The question is, actually, you tell me, why is this a problem for substance dualism? Yes?
If the body is able to move things, wouldn't the mind, what am I thinking? I'm trying to,
we need our body for anymore? Right? If we can move things with our mind.
That's right. And if I'm a substance dualist, don't I already think I can do that? Remember the problem. Here's this coffee mug. How many here, and be honest, how many think I can move that coffee mug with just my mind, without physical means?
Really hard.
The force is with you, bless you.
Thank you. Don't interrupt me now. So, what if I got closer to it? Would that help? Notice that's not a ridiculous statement. Why does getting closer to the mug not have any bearing on the capacity of me to move it with my mind alone? There's still technically an infinite amount of space, if you want, between me, my mind, and the thing. Or there's no space at all. It doesn't matter how close I am. That's irrelevant when it comes to whether or not something non-physical can affect something physical. My question is, and it relates to this point here, if I'm a Cartesian dualist, substance dualist, I should think that telekinesis, psychokinesis happens all the time. You would think it miraculous if I can move this cup with my mind alone. Why is it not equally miraculous that I can have a non-physical thought and cause things to happen in my neurons which cause my body to move? Why isn't this? And by the way, James Randi offers $1 million prize to somebody who can prove that they are capable of telekinesis or psychokinesis or ESP or something like that. I've been tempted to go to his place where they offer that $1 million and say, check it out. Here's my demonstration of mind over matter. Are you ready? Boom. Doing it. Psychokinesis, telekinesis. How am I doing it? My mind, which is not physical, is moving this meat bag backwards and forth. That's $1 million worth right there. That's ridiculous. But is it ridiculous because psychokinesis is ridiculous? And if psychokinesis is ridiculous, then wouldn't we have to say that Cartesian dualism is problematic? We don't want to say it's not problematic, it's different because my mind is really close to my brain. But why isn't this working? My mind is really close to the cup. Oh, but it's not attached to the cup. How can something not physical attach, I don't know how to do it, to something physical? Yeah.
I was just thinking that when it comes to this, I don't know if this is that you were talking about, like back at the very beginning of the class when you're talking about how Plato was talking about like you can't be certain of anything except that you're not certain, so therefore everything must come from like a higher realm.
Plato said we can't be certain of anything in the physical world, so knowledge has to come from outside of it. That's right.
So if tomorrow, someone turned around and was able to, prove without a doubt that they were able to levitate a cup,
Sure.
it's like that would change everyone's perception of what was able to happen.
Yes, I think so.
I mean, I bet some people here can't run 29 miles an hour, so stop Usain Bolt from doing it.
Is that how fast he runs?
Yeah.
That's insane.
It's insane, right?
Hussein is insane. Yeah. His name cannot be Bolt. That had to have been added after he was a sprinter. No way his name is Hussein Bolt. He's destined to become a sprinter. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, that's an irrelevant point.
Sorry, but the point I was trying to make was like everything that you're talking about. It seems crazy to think that even for someone that's like just a regular person, that if they could run 100 miles an hour, that seems ludicrous.
Right.
So I don't think that there's any problem with believing you could do something.
Certainly not.
You can't prove you can't.
Oh, well, here's the problem. Remember we talked about the fallacy of arguing from ignorance. We want to be cautious there and say, well, there's no evidence again. James Randi's evidence debunking Benny Hinn and debunking Uri Geller is not evidence against the possibility of telekinesis or psychokinesis. That's true. But the burden of proof rests on those who claim to have the powers. And if somebody's been offering for the last 30 years $1 million prize to demonstrate this capacity, and no one has won it yet, that's not evidence that it's impossible, but it's strong evidence against it. But that's a very different. It's not saying it's impossible. And I think and this is what would be problematic looking at the history of science in the 20th century, if we said, we're not going to gain anything from studying consciousness, that's like studying ghosts and that's a waste of time, that's a problem. And if we say, let's ignore all the studies in parapsychology because that's just hocus pocus nonsense, I think we're cutting ourselves off from potentially understanding the human experience. But the burden is a great burden on those who argue for this capacity. Because if we have this capacity, imagine how that can change the world. Transcendental meditation, that's the idea that we can levitate. If you can teach other people to levitate, you can change the world for better or worse. But why didn't the Maharishi, the Yogi Maharishi in the 1970s, when he started his own university, start writing papers and teaching people, this is how you levitate? Once that data and reality comes out, you can't hide that. If it were true that we could levitate and somebody could do it, that fact would not be hidden. There's no way you could hide that. That dude's levitating. How are you doing that? I'm not going to tell you. Then are you really levitating, or are you just a Chris Angel mind freak dude? Remember the guy who's... It looks so weird. How does he do it? Well, he admits he's a magician. Uri Geller, but he won't tell you how he does it. And Uri Geller. Houdini. He pissed off so many other magicians because he went around in the 1880s and 90s showing how these things were done. Right? This is how this medium, who claims to be able to talk to the dead, this is how that medium is doing it. How is the table rising while all our hands are on the table? Well, Houdini just simply went to one of these things and didn't listen to the instructions of the medium and simply kept his eyes open, whereas everyone else's eyes were closed, and he just watched. Everyone's holding hands, everyone's hands are flat on the table, and the medium is closing her eyes, and she's making all these noises, and he looks and he sees, oh, the table's moving, it's lifting because she's lifting it with her feet. That's how that's happening. It's usually very simple. And Houdini tried to tell his friend, Robert Louis Stevenson, this is how I do these tricks. And his friend Stevenson said, no, that's magic. He didn't believe that Houdini himself was actually engaged in merely trickery in the sense of magic that we talk about. Did you want to? Let's leave that. All right, so that leads up to our reading for today and the work of Gilbert Ryle. Here he is pictured. This is when philosophers all smoked pipes or something. They always smoked back in the 50s, 40s, and 50s because it looked cool. And it was.
So did lawyers.
Lawyers did it too, yeah, until they realized, oh, there's lip cancer. So Gilbert Ryle, in his book from 1949, The Concept of Mind, he's attacking viciously. And a lot of what we discussed already is sort of in the background, or at the very least, it's consistent with the kinds of critiques that Gilbert Ryle presents against what he'll call the official doctrine. He looks at Descartes' arguments as being accepted almost as dogma, which is to say unquestioned. And he'll call it the myth of the ghost in the machine. And he even says, and I speak about that with deliberate abusiveness, which I think is typical British arrogance. I'm not sure what it is, but he's sort of needling at this view that's very common. Remember, this is the common sense view. And what's the ghost? And what's the machine? Mind and the body. It's the official doctrine in the sense that it's not to be questioned. It's dogma. It's sort of infused in or diffused throughout society, and we just accept it as true without questioning. So Ryle wants to, question that and demonstrate some weaknesses with this dogma. And last time we looked at different approaches to the mind-body problem. We looked at substance dualism and the different forms. We looked at epiphenomenalism and idealism. Not too many of those folks around today. And then materialism. And Ryle is a materialist. Specifically, he's considered a behaviorist. Remember that the behaviorist, which was huge in the 1920s through the 1960s, 70s even, a behaviorist says mental states, minds, thoughts, and so forth, which we can't see. We can't perceive other people's minds, and he spends actually the first couple of pages talking about that problem, the problem of other minds. How do I know you have a mind? Well, it isn't some Cartesian substance that's forever distant from me. I only know of your mental states from your observable behaviors. I know that you're tired based upon your yawning. And I know that that causes me to yawn. So hide your yawns. I know that you're happy because you're smiling. We talk about it in terms of dispositional states. If you love this person, then here are the kinds of behaviors you would engage in. This is love having behaviors and so forth. And that was prominent for a long time, although there's a number of problems with that. I'm not going to get into that particular issue now. Let's first get at his critiques of Cartesian substance dualism from a materialist perspective. And we don't need to get specifically into his notion of behaviorism here. But one of the things he covers, and he only touches on this briefly in the reading you had, but there's a problem with substance dualism, and it's related to the issue of psychokinesis, telekinesis. Does anyone know what the law of conservation of energy is? Yeah.
It's that energy in the universe can't be created or destroyed, it's just constant.
Uh-huh.
It can transform into other types,
Right.
but it can't.
Cannot be created nor destroyed, it's simply transferred. You guys have do we have time for a quick joke? Now's a good time for a joke. Do you guys have one? No? Looks like you do. No? You sure? Really? All right. Fair enough. Because this is you're right. It's hilarious. The law of conservation of energy, which is the first law of thermodynamics. Remember when we talked about Locke and his memory theory, and that it butted up against the principle of transitivity? If A equals B and B equals C, then A has to equal C. But that wasn't the case for Locke with respect to memories not going all the way back to my youth, and therefore there's not an identity relation between my old age and my youth. If my view goes up against a basic law of physics or basic law of logic, there may be something wrong with my view, or it could be that the law of thermodynamics here is flawed. We'll see. Does it maybe not apply? So how does this apply to the mind-body problem? Can you see why this is relevant? No one? Yes?
Because you can't create something without destroying something, or vice versa.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
You can't just destroy matter, and you can't create something without destroying something, or vice versa. You have to start it's like kind of the law of exchange.
How does that relate with the mind and body problem? Why is it a problem for the mind-body problem?
If you're telling your arm to push something, you won't be able to push something that's a lot heavier than you, because your body has so much matter.
Well, that's true, but back it up. You want to cause your body to do something. How do you get your body to do something?
You're sending neural signals from your brain.
Correct, and that's all physical, and that requires energy.
Yeah.
How do you, which is not physical, the mind, make neurons move? Did you want to add to that?
I was just gonna say, if you claim the mind is non-physical, it can't move energy.
Yeah,
Or create energy, according to this.
Right, that's in a closed system, which physicists assume is the case of the universe. The idea that my mind, which isn't part of the physical world, because once we put it in part of the physical world, then we're back to all the problems we had with identity and free will, right? That it's subject to all of the whims of change and the causes of physics and so forth, cause and effect issue, laws of physics. If I'm to move things in the world, that requires energy. All motion, there's no way the radio needs to be that loud, really. I mean, it's got to be right there next to them. I was about, if it kept going, I was going to go out there and regulate. I was going to go out and lay down the law.
Send me.
Or send my mom. My mom's going to get you. Oh, really? Bring it on. All right. So that's how that exchange would have gone. Dude's lucky. I didn't have to send her out there. I assume it's a dude. All right. So here's the problem. Here's another Cartesian drawing. This is a great one. There's the pineal gland and everything. And he recognized, too, that, how he recognized this at this time is amazing. How the right eye is connected to the left hemisphere, and the left eye is connected to the right hemisphere of the brain. And he understood a lot about optics. But the pineal gland thing throws us off still. As Ryle puts it, there are no nerves running into the mind. Where does the energy go when I think? The assumption is, and we talked about this with free will, I have a thought that's not physical, but that causes things to happen in my motor cortex, that causes my neurons to move. Neurons are really, really tiny, but to get them to activate and to fire requires energy. Basic laws of physics. You cannot move things, even at the small, tiny, tiny level, without energy. How does thought bring energy into the world? Or rather, put another way, why isn't it the case that every time I think, I increase the amount of energy in the world? It seems substance dualism has to imply that that's what happens. In order to think and cause things in the physical world to happen, that requires bringing energy into the world. Or you could say, it's not creating energy, it's just using the energy already there and it's manipulating it. You have the same problem. How does something not physical manipulate energy? Or manipulate physical things? Sorry.
That's exactly what I was about to ask. Like, well, you could think of it as not creating energy, but just like manipulating the energy that's already there, but then it's still a problem.
Right. We might think of it in terms of light switches. That seems, I guess before the 1800s, it would seem magical that you just flip a switch and boom, light. It's magical. That's kind of like consciousness. And that's not coincidental that in the history of philosophy there's been all sorts of analogies between consciousness and light, and that we can just turn it off and on and so forth. But light, the analogy breaks down. That's all energy, which is all physical. Minds are not physical. And they seem forever cut off from the physical realm. Maybe that's not a problem. I'm going to leave that up. I'm going to leave that, let it simmer in your neurons or in your mind, whatever. And just to think about whether the law of conservation of energy is a problem. Is it being violated? And you might ask, if anyone take physics right now? Ask your physics teacher that. I know I always ask you guys to ask your biology teachers and your math teachers questions. I know that if they start to get pissed off about these questions, you can just, I suggest keep asking them, because they should like these questions. But what do physicists think about minds and bodies with respect to this law of conservation of energy? Because I've heard different things. Some say that this doesn't apply, right? The mind and body issue is different than our typical understanding of the law of conservation of energy. It doesn't apply in the same way here. I've not been satisfied as to why it doesn't. Or it does apply, but it isn't a problem. It's not really a violation. That's close. That's too bad. Your hand is up. You have to say something.
Oh, I have to say something.
Nah, that's good enough. Okay. All right. How are we doing on time? Anyone have a quick joke for us? Break things up? Move into the next problem? There's another problem with substance dualism, according to Ryle. Nobody has a quick one for us? Really? It's like
a cow with 3 legs.
a 3-legged cow? I don't know. Tri-tip. Ha! See what he did there? Tri-tip. Well done. Oh no, right. See? Now you feel better. We can go another hour without a break. Oh, you didn't like it? Okay. She's out of here. Joke. Oh, you come back. All right. What is the category mistake that Ryle discusses? This is one of his fundamental. He spends the most time on this problem. Why is Descartes and Cartesians guilty of a category mistake? Oh no. Yes.
Well, he uses the analogy of your parents coming to visit the university.
Yeah.
And you're walking around, you're showing them all the different buildings, but then they say, well, we came here for you to show us the university.
Right.
Where is it?
Yeah.
But
exactly.
They don't know that all of these buildings are the university. So
they're guilty of a category mistake by asking their children, well, okay, thank you for showing me all these parts. Now where's the university? As if it's something in addition to all of those parts. Ryle wants to say this is what Cartesians are doing when they speak of mind in contrast to body. And he gives a lot of examples. The university example, he talks about parents watching the military division go by, like a military parade or something like that. He talks about how jokes can oftentimes relate to this with esprit de corps. There was a category mistake last night. I mentioned, hey, that's going to happen in class tomorrow. I told you to remember it. Oh, dang it. Shoot. She wasn't. It was cocaine that messed up her mind. It was all the... Okay, all right, enough. None of that's true. So esprit de corps, this is just how we talk. It's not really.
It's not real.
It's not real. It's not real. So we might ask. So I'm with my son Milo, saying, and we're watching the parade go by, which we may be able to do soon. There may be a military parade in the United States, first one in a long time.
Wow.
This is not the United States. This is North Korea's military parade.
And soon we'll have them looking just like.
We can do better. Look at that. So imagine all of this goes by, and Milo asks, and we see the tanks, we see the troops, we see those giant tubes, which presumably are weapons of some sort, and these rocket launchers. And then Milo asks, where's the division? Well, that's a confusion of what the word division means. There isn't the military personnel. There isn't the tanks and the cavalry and so forth, and then a division in addition, right? You don't play the game. You don't have all the players on the field playing, and then there's also esprit de corps in addition to that. This is the example he uses, which is a kind of weird one. He's talking about cricket. He talks about the batters and the wicketers and whatever else is involved with cricket. And you can say the same thing with the university. The university isn't something over and above or in addition to all the buildings, the classrooms, and the students. So to put it in propositional form, and I'll give you an image of it too. It's not something extra in addition to the parts of the brain. They'll be like going through, this is like Leibniz-Mill thought experiment. This is the response, in a way, to that thought experiment and other variations of it. You walk around, you walk through the brain. Remember, we've expanded the body to the size of a mill or a factory such that you can walk through it. I see all these physical parts. I see the corpus callosum, the amygdala, the frontal lobes, the pineal gland, of course. Now, where's the mind? That's kind of like going through the campus, showing each part, showing the students, showing the teachers, showing the classrooms, and then having your parent ask, now where is the college? Does everyone see how that analogy works? I'll let you get that down. To help you visualize it, I've gotten some pictures to give you a virtual tour of the college. So here's the stadium, and look at that. Can you look at that? Have you all seen that before? You all know what we're dealing with. So there's you show the students, or sorry, you show your parents. Look, there's the stadium, La Playa Stadium. There's that thing, looking out over that. That's an awesome thing, and there's water in it there.
Yeah, it's a fountain.
All right, there used to be. That must have been before they realized. Oh, we're living in a desert climate. We should stop wasting water, because there's no water in it now. It's just empty. I think as it should be. I still think there should be fish in there, though.
Without water.
Yeah. Then there's this. That's the cafeteria. I think that's East Campus. There's that new building. Look at that. Huh? You show your parents that. There's that building. This is the library. How many libraries have a cappuccino stand in them? Ours does. And then we ask, here's a general picture. So I show you all the buildings. And then I ask, well, where is it? Is it here? Is that it? Maybe it's over here. Is this the building? Is this the college? And on it goes. It's just there. It's there it is. It's not anything in addition. It's just those buildings. How is this analogous to the mind? Well, the analogy works this way. The college buildings, the structures are the brain parts, and the presumption is here the mind is the university, as if it's something over and above, some other thing. But that's a misuse or a misunderstanding of language. Does everyone buy that? Or do you find this analogy breaks down in a way that Ryle could not have conceived of in the 1940s? What's different about college and university today that Ryle could not have conceived of? Maybe could have conceived of it. Online. Where is the college? Well, if you look at some of the commercials, it could be in your apartment, just lying in bed doing class. Doing class. It's a different way of doing class. So where is the university? You've heard of University of Phoenix? Is it in Phoenix? No. Is it a university? Also, no. It is not. It's also not. No offense if you intend to go there. Although I suggest not going there. Don't go there. Because where are you going? It's not a place. And so that might be an interesting response to this thought experiment, the category mistake. This one doesn't really apply, but that doesn't mean that the other examples don't apply. The military procession, that seems to still apply to why we're misapplying concepts. I think he says it here. Failure to see this mistake just means we don't know we don't know how to talk, right? It's kind of ignorance. So Ryle's really upset. He doesn't take lightly his criticisms of Cartesian substance dualism. We're failing to understand how to wield these words like mind or division or university. What was the other one? I bought a left-hand glove and a right-hand glove, and also a pair of gloves. No, the left and right-hand glove, that just is the pair of gloves. That was another example he gives. Any clarity needed on that? Because that's one of the central points. And there's a couple more things I want to say before we get out, which is, when do we get out? Okay, 10 minutes. Right? All right, that's fine. There's this problem. This keeps coming up. Why might substance dualism violate this logical principle of Occam's razor? Do I need to remind us what Occam's razor is? Do you recall what Occam's razor is?
Can you go over it again?
I can. We'll all use. You ever get this drawing? I know you guys copy my drawings in class. You ever got it?
Take a picture.
Yeah, get a picture of that. Because you're not going to see drawing like this in other classes, I assure you that. Nobody's taking a picture. Not even you. So, remember the example of how were pyramids built? It's a mystery. Who built the pyramids? How the pyramids were built? And one hypothesis is that it was slave labor. That explains how it is that these giant blocks were able to be moved about in such a precise way without contemporary mathematical precision that we do today have. How could the ancient Egyptians have done this? That's one hypothesis. And we know that this is a decent hypothesis because we know about the fact that there were thousands and thousands of slaves. And we understand that they can move things with pulleys and wheels. They did have that. What's an alternative hypothesis?
Aliens.
That's right. How do we all know that so well? We know it because of the History Channel. History Channel. What was wrong with this hypothesis is we have a mystery here. How is it that the pyramids are built? Well, slave labor explains that, and it helps reduce some of the mystery. Invoking aliens increases mysteries. Now we have more things to explain. How are the pyramids built? They're built by aliens. What are aliens? Why are aliens building the pyramids? Why are they only coming at that time? How did they get here? Where are they from? Notice this is more mystery than we started with. Occam's razor says, cut away the hypothesis that increases the amount of things that need to be explained. That's the razor part. Cut away the extraneous. You don't want to multiply entities beyond necessity. That is, you don't want your worldview to have so much extra stuff that is inexplicable or requires a lot more explanation than what it's intended to do. How does that apply to the mind and body? We touched on this with libertarianism and free will briefly. Do you remember?
Invoking the mind just makes more problems. The non-physical entity just creates more questions.
Right. It requires a different... So philosophers of metaphysics will talk about it in terms of ontology. Ontology is a branch of metaphysics that deals with being, onto meaning being. We'll look at, in the philosophy of religion, something called the ontological argument for God. We want a very sparse ontology. That is to say, we want to be able to explain the world as simply as we can. All things being equal. If it turns out that this hypothesis is superior to this for some other reason, and yet is more complex or requires further explanation, that's fine. Occam's razor, it's tough to establish when it should be wielded. But Ryle thinks it ought to be wielded here with respect to minds, because we understand to an extent how brains work. We don't know how brains give rise to consciousness. But there are all sorts of things that we didn't know, Ryle would say, and other what are known as eliminative materialists would say. There's all sorts of things we didn't understand in the 1700s, in the 1800s, in the 1900s, and then science figures out, oh, this is how it's done, and this is how it's done naturally and physically. We can get rid of these concepts that we used to have that have no causal powers anymore, that in fact just confuse things.
But occurs are also universal if you have the same knowledge available at the time. So it's like if we have like a solar flare or something that wiped out most of humanity, and then we got a bunch of people looking at the Statue of Liberty and there were no records of how it was built. I mean, they wouldn't know what to think because they might not remember that we had steel mills and stuff. They might figure out, hey, the easiest thing is it would just drop there from the sky.
Right. When you apply Occam's razor, it does. You're using it when you're trying to figure out which hypothesis it best explains a given phenomenon.
Simplest reason.
And typically, it's going to be a simpler hypothesis is the better one. Typically, right? We'll see that maybe this is used in the philosophy of religion in both directions, right? Atheists will use it against the theists, and the theists will use it against atheists. And so we have to be cautious when we use it. And is it? And when we ask this, how much data does one have? Is it irrational to go with this hypothesis? Well, it depends. How much evidence and available facts do you have with you? Do you have at the moment? And it may be that you're wrong completely, and we can see that looking back in the past, yeah, they were wrong, but it wasn't irrational for them to have believed that. It's not irrational for my daughter Lola to, let's say 2 years ago when she's 2, to have believed in Santa Claus. Why? Well, because the data available to her. And let's not use my daughter because I didn't say
You
one
were
way or the other.
11 when you stopped.
That's enough. That's enough. Nonsense. Total nonsense. How about this? When I was 10, it was rational for me to believe in Santa. Why? Because my parents lied to me. Well, I should expect.
And your sister. Yeah.
Yes, my older sister. Who saw her? Gretchen? Remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. She was that tall back then?
She still is.
Short now. Anyway, they all lied to me. And then you got the meteorologist saying, hey kids, Santa was seen over Houston, blah, blah, blah. And I see that. I said, why would the meteorologist lie about Santa? All of that data seems to show, hey, Santa's probably real. And it's not irrational in that case. Even though the belief is wrong, given all the data that I could have at the time, that's a rational belief for an 11-year-old. Damn it. All right, let's move on. So the simpler hypothesis is to be preferred, all things being equal, as we were discussing. You don't want to multiply entities or things in need of further explanation than is necessary. This is key. As a substance dualist, we might say, wait a minute, it is necessary to invoke something like a mind that's not physical. Because our contemporary neuroscience, for example, as we discussed last time, will never be able to explain consciousness. So we have to invoke something else. All right, so that's Occam's razor. We've seen, and Ryle also gets into that, an explanation of it in 2 different places in the text, 100 and 138. Oh, let me give you a visual of how this works. So, as a Cartesian dualist, we ask, what is it that makes this body conscious? What is it that enables it to move? And we might say it's the brain. And here's a what do you call that? X-ray of an actor, Homer Simpson. So what makes Homer Simpson conscious? The materialist view is, well, it's somehow in the brain. Something about the brain is what gives rise to consciousness, gives rise to that first person, what it's like to be you experience. As a substance dualist, though, that's not enough. Remember that 3-pound lump of flesh that looks like a Shar-Pei? Doesn't seem to be enough. So we invoke a self, a homunculus, represented here. Not a homunculus, but perhaps a... What is it? Homunculus. See? It's he did it. It's very good. Well done. Homunculus. So a homunculus is a little man, a little person. And that's our assumption. Our self is inside somehow, behind our eyes, looking out, perceiving things. But then we ask, wait a minute, if this body is conscious because of the brain, but the brain is conscious because of the self, isn't it a legitimate question to ask? What makes that conscious? Donuts?
It's, yeah,
Donuts?
on
Oh,
the show.
I don't know. I do know the show, but I don't remember the donuts making him. Donuts actually make him conscious? Oh, well, that's different. That's different. Well, I was going to say there's a little brain inside there. Do you see how this leads to a what?
Oh, look at
What's it called? I don't want to give you the answer. Infinite regress. Because what makes that brain conscious? There's a little. You can't tell. That's a Sharpay right there. And on it goes. What makes that conscious? What makes that conscious? We have an infinite regress. We might cut away, using Occam's razor, cut away that one. That's too much. That requires too much explanation. Cut away the brain of your soul. That doesn't make any sense. Cut that away. Maybe you want to stay with the soul or the mind. And it's just the nature of minds to be conscious. But you still have to explain what minds are. From Ryle's perspective, it makes more sense to cut that away, leaving us only with this tiny little brain. It's mysterious, yes. How does this give rise to consciousness? We have fewer mysteries if we rely on this and try to understand how this extraordinarily, it's the most complex bit of matter, maybe not this guy's, but everyone else's brain is the most complex bit of matter in the universe. We're only now just starting to study it from a neuroscientific perspective. So perhaps the physicalist, materialist says it's simply a matter of time and devoting our resources to it that can explain this. And we don't need to invoke something extra that simply confuses us. There's more I want to say about this, but we're out of time. So for next time, you have William Lycan, Robots and Minds, and John Searle, Minds, Brains, and Science. I have a few more things to say about this, then we'll get into artificial intelligence. Your test is not until the 3rd, and I'm sorry, that's the Tuesday right after spring break, but what are you going to do? You're not going anywhere. You're going to go to the beach right there and just take your books with you. So keep up the readings, as always.